And when I teach, I walk around, okay? And normally when I give a presentation like this, I walk around. But I don't think I'm going to be able to do that tonight, so you're crimping my style. I want you to know that. The second thing is I'm not a big person on speeches, if you know what I mean. So as we're going along, if you have something to add or you have a question that you don't want to wait until we're all done, hey, chime in, okay?
Thank you.
All right. So, most people, most Americans, know very, very little about the Voice of America, which should not be at all surprising, because it wasn't for you. It was for the rest of the world. So tonight we're going to kind of take a look at the history of the VOA. How in the heck did it get here, for heaven's sakes? And we'll talk a little bit about the exhibits at the museum. And you're going to be one of the first group to see our new, a portion of one of our new exhibits. No one else in the public has seen it, so you've got something to look forward to a little bit later. So, driving along Tylersville Road, there's that building. Looks like a prison, looks like an airport, you know, depending on what. And especially people up in Westchester, you know, everybody that comes to the museum says, you know, I've been driving by this damn place for 50 years and I always wanted to get in. Well, you can get in now. When it was open, not a good idea. There were armed guards on the property and they didn't take kindly to people moving on. But anyway, it's a pretty iconic building. And of course, because it sits on a piece of property that, by the way, can never be developed. When the federal government gave it to the community, never be developed. So all that grass is going to stay, okay? So, what the VOA Museum is really a nexus of some unbelievable technology and some very innovative programming. And we talk about the technology, but we don't want to be a repository of old tubes. We want to show what those old tubes enabled. And that's really the beauty of the Voice of America. The reach of the Voice of America is extraordinary. So, how did it all start? Well, the Second World War. President Roosevelt is looking across the pond, and he sees that the one thing the Nazis could do and understood for their time, more than most other people, was the power of media. You know, Hitler had people making movies about the Aryan race. He had his own newspapers. He had his own radio stations. Of course, you've seen, I'm sure you watch sometimes on cable, you see some of the addressing hundreds of thousands of people at stadia, etc. He was a master at trying to shape public opinion. Roosevelt looks at that and says, you know, we don't do a very good job of that at all, especially as it relates to our messages to Europe. And of course, during the Second World War, that was all very important. One of the things that, as I said, the United States only had 13 shortwave radio stations in operation back then. Now, shortwave is important because it can get that far, whereas all of the media that we have in the United States never adopted shortwave as their way of communicating, whereas around the world, totally different. But in the United States, it was never developed and therefore didn't build them. But if you wanted to get a program or a signal to Europe or Africa or South America, you had to have shortwave. So the United States had, 13 total, the most powerful of which was here in Cincinnati, before the Voice of America. And their whole foreign information system was kind of disjointed. As opposed to Germany, Hitler had 68 stations just for Germany. All Hitler all the time, so to speak. And he had a staff of thousands that did nothing but work on his media messages. Today they would be doing Facebook or Instagram. Back then they were doing movies and radios. He even, and this is the interesting thing, he understood the power of radio because radio could bring him into your living room. And he understood how important that was. It became a personal type of communication. But he also understood that that was also dangerous because radio doesn't have walls. And that was dangerous to him. So what did he do? He went to his engineers and he said, hey, engineers, make me a radio that can only get my stations. And they came up with a thing called the Volksempfänger. You come over to the museum, we have a Volksempfänger, a real live, honest-to-goodness Volksempfänger. I'm totally, for people who speak German, I know I am totally messing up the pronunciation. But anyway, what that means is people's radio, people's receiver, okay? And his engineers built it in such a way that it was not very sensitive, so it couldn't get the BBC, and later on couldn't get the Voice of America. And he was so concerned that maybe somebody with a technical ability would be able to, do something with the radio. So, if anybody speaks German, they're way ahead of me here. When you went to your Best Buy and bought this in Berlin, and you brought it home, there was this orange tag on it, okay? And I presume you don't speak German. I certainly don't speak German. But this is what you were faced with. Listening to foreign broadcasts is a crime against the national security of our people. It's the Führer's order. It's punishable by death, by prison and hard labor, and later on even by death. So you get your old soldering gun out and some wire and start working on this. Not a good idea. Not a good idea. So President Roosevelt says, what do I do to combat this? So one of the things was he called all the major broadcasting people to Washington. People from NBC, Mutual, Dumont, GE, RCA, Westinghouse. He brought them into a room. Actually, his lieutenants brought him into a room and said, who can build me a radio station that can reach Europe, especially Europe, and then later on Africa and South America, in the shortest amount of time? And all of the people in the room but one looked at their shoes, except the engineer from Crosley Broadcasting in Cincinnati. Well, this is in the early 40s. In the late 30s, you might remember that WLW 700, now operating at 50,000 watts, was operating at 500,000 watts. Also, across the street from WLW on Tylersville Road was WLWO. He already had a shortwave service to Europe running. It was a commercial service. So the Crosley guy kind of said, we could do that. So the answer, when people say, why did the Voice of America choose the hillside over in Butler County for the Voice of America, it's 2.5, the answer is 2.5 words. Powell, Crosley, and I'll call Junior half a word. He had the engineers that understood how to build high-power radio transmission. For those of you who are engineers in here, you appreciate the whole concept and the difficulty of scaling up. Some people think, well, you got a 10 watt and you just want to go to 20 watt, well, you just add 10 watts. Well, an engineer will tell you, no, that's not always the case. his engineers understood how to scale and make high-power transmitters that would work. So that's why it's here in Cincinnati. As I said, WOW, still down there. That tower is still there, was put up in the 30s, but hit by a couple airplanes. Tower never had any problems. The airplanes didn't do very well. But anyway, that's why Crosley was chosen to do it. Now, the building itself is amazing, and I wouldn't have believed this until we got the documentation. From the time it was a cornfield, from the time till the time they turned on the first transmitter was 18 months. The building was built in 12 months. That is nothing short of extraordinary. And I wouldn't have believed it, except when you get back then, and I'm sure it's the case now, when you get a contract for the government, every week you had to turn in a report, okay? A written report. And they were detailed, windows were delivered today. Bulldozer did that detail. We've got the book, which is a big, loosely, all the reports and it was indeed built. Now, all 6 of the transmitters weren't operational by then, but they were able to broadcast the first broadcast in 18 months. In that building were 6 of the most powerful shortwave transmitters ever built. And they were all hand-built, either in that building or before the roof was on the building. Crosley rented, if you're familiar with downtown Cincinnati, on Central Parkway, where the School for the Creative and Performing Arts is, across the street there used to be a candy factory, and it was abandoned. And he rented that, and that's where they built the transmitters. The only parts of the transmitters that were not handcrafted here in Cincinnati were the tubes themselves, and they were contracted with a tube company on the East Coast. But all of the engineers from UC College of Engineering kind of came together to build this facility.
Dallas came back with a very simple one-page contract. We were to construct 6 200,000-watt transmitters, shortwave, 24 high-efficiency antennas to reach Europe, North, Central, South Africa, and East and Western South America. This is an unusual situation because 200,000-watt transmitters had never been built before. We acquired this 625 acres of land just west of the WLW transmitter site. This location was ideal. It was flat, safe from coastal attack, with adequate power available from both the Cincinnati and Dayton power companies.
And I have a hint for you. If you're ever driving over there and a tornado is coming toward you, go to that building. That building, the interior walls are solid concrete. It was built to take a direct hit. They were really concerned that someday it may be bombed. But it's pretty beefy.
In Bethany, Ohio, on a last year's cornfield, there stands tonight a forest of wires and towering poles. They are shortwave radio towers, arranged in rhythmic patterns, so that at a moment's notice they can be beamed on 24 different lands in 5 of the world's 6 warring continents. These shortwaves are not like those of our standard broadcasting band. They do not die out in a few hundred miles. They are the siege guns of radio, the heavy artillery, guns of war that can hurl explosive facts against the enemy's weapons of lies and confusion anywhere in the world. There are also potential guns of peace that can be turned against misinformation and ideas that lead to war. Tonight, we are dedicating the newest and most powerful group of shortwave broadcasting stations in the world, built for our government by the Crosley Corporation. 3 brand new transmitters of 200,000 watts power each. For those who have built them, this is a proud achievement.
That was the speech at the dedication at the museum in 1944. And that was the head of the FCC at the time. So, one of the things that Roosevelt really thought about the Voice of America when he developed the idea was, you know, if Hitler's going to do propaganda, we should do propaganda, you know. And he really thought that that was the way to go. But he was talked out of it. He was talked out of it. There were, through the history of the Voice of America, there have been several luminaries that John Houseman was one of the first directors of the Voice of America. You probably recognize Edward R. Murrow, et cetera, who's considered one of the most important news people in the world. They went to him and they said, you know, we don't think it should, and he was using propaganda in the negative sense. If you look it up in a dictionary, it's not always negative, but most of the time when you think in terms of propaganda, you're thinking of negative. So he was thinking negatively, and Murrow and Houseman and all the people through the years said, no, we got to tell it like it is. If you want people to believe you, you have to tell the truth. The mantra, tell the truth and let the world decide. That was really the mantra of the Voice of America. And he was talked out of it. And the Voice of America throughout its history maintained that, much to the chagrin, I might add, to politicians then and now, who don't always like the people talking about things that maybe the United States didn't do quite right. But did it work? The very interesting thing is that on a given day, a given weekend especially, we're open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we almost always have somebody coming in who was a listener of the Voice of America in some country, you know, Czechoslovakia, you know, Turkey, China. And it's, first of all, it's almost like a religious experience. It's like they're going to Mecca or Jerusalem or the Vatican. You know, in fact, many times you'll see them sitting there with tears in their eyes, remembering, oh, this is where, when I was listening in my grandma's barn or in the attic or in the living room, this is where it was coming from. And we ask those people, we say, well, why did you believe us and not Radio Moscow or Radio China or fill in the blanks? And it's quite interesting, the response.
Inevitably, the news that the Voice of America would be carrying to the world in the first half of 1942 was almost all bad news. As Japanese victories and invasions followed one another with sickening regularity, and the Nazi armies moved ever deeper into Russia and the Near East, we would have to report our reverses without measling. Only thus could we establish a reputation for honesty, which we hoped would pay off on that distant but inevitable day when we could start boasting of our own invasions and victories.
So that was what Houseman said he wanted to do. Tell the truth and let the world decide.
Well, the difference between local news like Radio Moscow and the Voice of America was that Voice of America did report the facts and did report true facts. In the Soviet Union, you know, airplanes never crashed and crops were always good.
That was a Russian guy who came. He came right out of Central Casting. He lives in Westchester. He's about 275 pounds. He's got a tooth missing, okay? And his name is Igor. I mean, we couldn't have found that guy. But he was so articulate. He said, you know, no, we don't believe this stuff.
Czechoslovakia, in this atmosphere of oppression, the only moment of hope occurs when we hear the Voice of America.
The impact of VOA is tremendous. I would say if you ask anybody of my age in China, especially college graduates, everybody can echo on my point. VOA give them access to the outside world and also open the mind.
Remember the Wolfenfogger? We talked about that before. So I'm sitting in my office, okay? It's a Monday. We're not open. Well, if you've been to our place, you know we have a quarter of a mile driveway, so you can't sneak up on me. I look out the window, I see the car coming up. So I normally go down to the lobby and say, sorry, we're not open today, but, you know, we'll be open and please come back and see us. So this guy gets out of his car and his wife, his name is Felix, and his wife's name was Lola. And Lola come up, knock on the door, and I explained. He said, I don't want to see your museum. Oh, okay. I want to give you something. Oh, okay. So we go out to his car. He had a big trunk. I was a little concerned, but we opened it. and he presented me with a transistor radio. Well, if you come to our museum, we don't need another radio. But I tried to be nice to him. You know, he's generous. He's giving me this radio. But then he tells me the story. Well, Felix and Lola didn't always live in Westchester. During the Cold War, they lived in Ukraine. They lived in a little village in Ukraine. Of course, back then it was under the Soviet control, part of the Soviet Union. And he said, I bought this radio, Soviet built, in 1960, during the Cold War. And just like the Volkswagen, guess what? It was not easily able to receive Western broadcast. They left off some of the frequencies, etc., that like the BBC used, etc. And then he looks at me and he has this gleam in his eye and he said, but I knew a guy. And in the village there was a guy, maybe he was a ham, who knows, that was very familiar with electronics, and he rewired the radio for Felix. In fact, if you take the back off of that radio, you can see it's been, really worked on. And then Lola said something that was really interesting. She said, everybody in our village had one of the rewired radios, but nobody would admit it because we weren't allowed to have it. And we called it our under-the-blanket radio. I tell you that story and play some of those interviews just to elucidate how important getting information, truthful information, factual information is to people, individually and as groups, and what they'll do to get it. We have a display with this radio on it at the museum. And it was only in the museum. The exhibit was only up for maybe a couple weeks. And one day there was a gentleman, and I noticed, he was standing in front of that radio for much longer than you'd normally do as an exhibit. And I walked over and I said, yeah, it's a cool story. And he looks at me, he said, yes. He says, he was Vietnamese, by the way. He says, my dad was North Vietnamese, and he had a radio like this that worked. And he said, if they would have found him out, they probably would have killed him. Again, what people will do to get information. And that's what Voice of America did from 1944 through last March. The Voice of America at Bethany Station ceased operation in November of 94, because Voice of America no longer needed to use high-power shortwave, because by then the rest of the world was internet, cellular, etc. And any of you who have traveled, especially in developing countries, know this better than most. Most Americans don't realize that the penetration of cellular technology in developing countries makes us look like neophytes, because they never had to overbuild a wired. They went directly to cell. So people do their banking, have done their banking that way. So using cellular to get information to people in those countries is actually quite an efficient way of doing it. But you no longer needed the short wave. VOA today, still in the courts. It's essentially closed. The government felt that it was no longer needed and it was not giving the right information around the world. Whether it's permanent or not, I'm not here to say, and also don't really wish to give an opinion on that. It is. Let's just leave it at that. If you come to the museum, first of all, there's a whole section on the Voice of America. You can travel through the control room. You can walk through one of the transmitters. There are 6 of them. Each of them was the size of, each of the transmitters are the size of 2 city buses. They're very large, very complex. And we're not trying to teach people how to build transmitters, but just walking through them and seeing how complex they are is pretty cool experience. We also spend a lot of time on the whole concept of radio technology, both its history and its importance to the world. Most people, especially young people, when you think in terms, when you say radio, oh, that's what my mom listens to in the car. And of course, young people wouldn't know a radio if they, wouldn't know how to turn it on. But we're not talking about that radio. We're talking about radio. How does it work? How do these waves go through and that is important, because without radio, you don't have Wi-Fi, you don't have GPS, you don't have Bluetooth. I can go on and on. iPhone radio right now, an iPhone, has about 10 radio receivers and transmitters built into them, to do different things. That's the type of technology that we're working with kids. As I said, there's the 1960s control room. We have a diorama. The property, when the building was open and running, was 1 square mile. So if you're familiar with that area, you know where the hospital is. All right, that was an antenna. It went from the expressway to Butler Warren to Liberty to Tylersville, 1 square mile. There were over 20 antenna structures on the site. Only 3 of them were towers. Most of them were rhombic wire antennas, which are very large. They are wires strung between poles, and each antenna can be the size of 8 to 10 football fields. That's why they needed so much space. And each of those antennae were oriented to send a signal to a different part of the world. And that's why they needed all of that property. So we built a little diorama to show people what it looks like. We also have a lot of history of the Cincinnati, for instance. We just restored this camera. It's pretty big. It weighs 400 pounds. That was the first color camera in Cincinnati, and it was used at Crosley. And it took 4 people to set it up. But that was done at Crosley Field. And of course, radio collection. A lot of stuff on local broadcasting. Larry Smith and his puppets, and Ruth Lyons and Paul Dixon and all that. There's a whole wing on that. You're going to see something tonight that no one else has seen yet because it's still in beta. But we are in the process of building what we call the Radio Discovery Lab. And it's especially going to be for kids, but adults will also. And again, we're going to be doing something special to teach kids how radio developed. Again, not the radio in the car, but the technology. But we're not going to do it. Radio was developed beginning in the 1600s with experiments in magnetism and electricity through Ben Franklin, through Faraday, through Hertz, through Marconi, etc. Now, all these people are dead. Well, not really. They are dead, but they can still be very impactful. For instance, James Maxwell. James was a mathematician, and James was the first person to realize that, you know what? Radio waves and light waves are the same thing. It's all part of the electromagnetic spectrum.
My name is James Clerk Maxwell. Some call me a physicist, though I rather think of myself as a painter with light. I was fascinated by colour, how red, green and blue light could mix to make every hue in the rainbow. So I built an experiment, 3 magic lanterns with red, green and blue filters. When their beams overlapped, the colours blended just like paint, only faster. From there, I realised colour wasn't a thing of pigments, but of vibrations. Each hue a different frequency of light. Red waves are slow and gentle, blue ones fast and lively. A rainbow, you see, is nature's way of spreading out those frequencies for all to admire. Then I asked, what lies beyond the rainbow? Below the visible red waves are radio waves, low frequencies that the Voice of America used can travel around the earth. Higher frequencies like Bluetooth carry music to your headphones, and Wi-Fi brings your internet. Above visible blue light, we have ultraviolet and X-rays that peak inside your body. All these waves, radio, microwave, light, X-ray, are part of one great family, the electromagnetic spectrum. I call it the music of the universe. Some notes we can see, others we can only feel. But they're all around us, dancing through the air right now. So when you look at a light, or send a text, or warm your lunch, remember, you are a wave rider. You are surrounded by invisible colors, carrying energy and information across space. So, when you gaze at a rainbow, remember, you're seeing but a sliver of the grand electromagnetic symphony that fills the universe. And radio, dear friends, is simply another note in that eternal song.
So we are going to have a room in which people like Maxwell will be there, not only to give descriptions like this, but there will be hand-on experiments in magnetism and radio for the kids to do, but the luminary is going to be instructing them. It's all made possible, of course, by AI. Obviously, there weren't any color pictures of, of him, etc. But it is a way of engaging kids and adults and explaining technical things without, all of the getting down into the weeds. I think Maxwell, in his whole concept of color, oh, that's how it works, is pretty cool. But give us a year, and then come over, and you'll be able to see our new exhibit. So recent improvements there. The building was in pretty bad shape. Never had air conditioning. Never had heat. Never needed heat. We had more heat than I think the ambient temperature of Westchester when this thing was running was probably 10 degrees warmer, global warming. Never had restrooms, but nothing that a person with a walker or a wheelchair could get in. So that's all been solved. We have all brand new, and we have leveled the place. One of the problems with a 1940s industrial building is if in the 1940s, if you went to work, disabled people didn't go to work. I mean, they stayed home. And therefore, the building had 15 different levels. You had curbs, you had stairs, etc. Now, for an industrial building, not a problem. You get people, a group of people like you. Some people maybe have mobility issues. A step like this can be a real barrier. So we have leveled the entire building, which was no mean feat, let me tell you. But the building is accessible for all, energy efficient, all new heating and air conditioning, and there's not an incandescent bulb to be found in the building. So, we're open every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We hope that you might stop by sometime. We do offer special groups. I had one yesterday morning. I had 25 people from, where were they from? Oh, a church in Wilmington, Ohio. They came down in their bus, and we'll do a group tour anytime. And we can actually handle this entire group. What we would do is we would break you up into, they're docent-led tours, And what we would do is we'd break you up into groups of like 10 or 15 to get you through the museum. But if you have a social club, a book club, etc., you want to come, just call the museum and we'll be delighted to. There is a minimum charge if we have to open, and that would be $150. That's 15 people. You bring 16, and it's $160. But the minimum is $150 because we fire up the air conditioning, turn on the lights, etc. Of course, when we're open regularly, it's $10 a person. Kids are free. You had a question?
Minimum tour group size?
Pardon me?
Minimum tour group size?
There's no minimum, but there's a minimum charge.
Okay.
It's $150. If you bring 2 people, it's $150. If you bring 15 people, it's $150. You bring 16, it's $160. It's just so, because we have to open up the building.
Yeah, I get that.
And very often, we'll get groups of like 12, and they just say, what the hey, extra buck here and there. Yes, back there.
Who's doing your radio lab?
We have some amazing volunteers, amazing volunteers. Our IT person, okay, is a retiree from Intel. And to give you an idea of his rank at Intel, his email address at Intel is joe@intel. We have a lot of people like him. We're also working with a firm in South Africa who are actually going to be doing some of the actual room design, et cetera. This is $1 million project. It's a $1 million project.
Where are you getting the money from?
We've raised. We're not there yet, but we're well on our way.
You're looking for donations.
Pardon me?
You're looking for some donations.
Yeah, that's right. But we've had some very significant donations. It's as best that we can see it. The radio lab there is, and talking to this group in South Africa who does museums all over the world. Okay, there's nothing like it. Nobody's even close to it. We had the guy from Right Pat come down. He said, "We're not even close to doing something like this." So we're pretty far ahead of the curve. We just need to be careful not to get over our skis there. Yes?
I was hoping you'd have a photo of all the antennas that were
The closest thing, well, we do have photos there on the wall, and you can see them. I just didn't bring them. It's pretty difficult to show the entire, it's 1 square mile. So the 3 towers that most people remember were 300 feet tall, and they actually were holding wires between them. Again, all of shortwave, it's not like television where you have a tower that holds an antenna. The antenna is actually on the top. Or WLW, the radio. That whole structure, okay, is the antenna. It sits on a glass ball, so it's not grounded. But shortwave are normally not that way. They are strings of wire. And because remember, shortwave, the difference between shortwave broadcasts and why it can get around the world, probably should have mentioned this, is that if you listen to WLW or are tuning in a TV station over the air, essentially you need to be able to see that. Technically, it's line of sight. Radio waves travel in a straight line. Shortwave doesn't go that way. It goes that way and bounces off of the ionosphere and can bounce off several times to get to Europe. That's how it works. And that's why it required so much power. The building, according to one of our engineers who did the calculations, when the building was running at full tilt, all the transmitters running, 6 transmitters and all the cooling and all that stuff, it consumed enough electricity for a 1940s town of 15,000 people. We had our own substation right next to the building. So tremendous use of electricity, and that's one of the reasons why when they no longer needed to use shortwave, they immediately went to satellite, internet, etc. Yes, sir.
I know
that they've probably eliminated most of
Radio,
the radio free stations that they still broadcast.
the radio,
That's all gone. Radio Free Europe. Yeah, Radio Free Europe.
oh, the federal government operates several external broadcasting facilities under one roof, okay? One of them is Voice of America. One of them is Radio Free Europe. I'm going to come back to that in a second. If you've been in the military or you're a diplomat and you travel around the world a lot, you're familiar with Armed Services Radio Network. That's how you can watch the Super Bowl in Beirut, you know. And Radio Marti is a Spanish service primarily aimed at Cuba. So all of those, Marti is still kind of running. Armed Forces Radio Network, yeah, that continues to run. Radio Free Europe and Voice of America are in hiatus right now. The thing about Radio Free Europe is, all I'll say is that the difference between VOA and Radio Free Europe is that Roosevelt got his wish. The funding for Radio Free Europe for years came from the CIA. The funding for the Voice of America has been various places, State Department, et cetera. But any other questions? Yes, sir.
I have a couple of questions. Did the announcers in the various languages all come to this one location?
Good question, and I should have answered that.
And then the next question is, did people like Hans Kaltenborn and announcers of those days?
Well, let me take the first question first. There were never any studios here in Cincinnati, okay? All of the programming emanated originally for a very short time out of New York, and then for the rest of its existence on K Street in Washington, D.C. And that's where it was, is and was. There were never any talent here in Cincinnati. It was all brought in early on. It was brought in using high-capacity telephone lines. And then later on, if you look at the building, you'll see there's a large satellite dish next to it and that sort of thing. Now, the second question was?
The people like Hans Kaltenborn, announcers on radio that were American famous, did they participate?
Voice of America had their own talent. Robert Bauer was one of them that started at WLWO and then went to the Voice of America, and he was Austrian, spoke fluent Germany. Voice of America broadcast in its heyday in 50 different languages in a given week. Each one of those programs was hosted by not only somebody who spoke the language, but most of the time were from that country, because they wanted somebody that understood the culture of the country, not just, and I'm sure you've all, you can't just translate stuff. And so the Voice of America, now, they also had programming. During the war, a lot of the broadcasting was regarding the war, okay? But if you think about it, by the time VOA got really up and running during the war was at an ebb. The real impact of the Voice of America came during the Cold War. And there, the programming was all over the map. For instance, one of the most popular programs around the world was a program hosted by a gentleman that you won't know. His name is Willis Conover. But if you are a jazz aficionado anywhere else in the world, you think he was God. The jazz program was listened to by millions of people around the world. An American art form, jazz. Louis Armstrong had programs on the Voice of America. They recorded the audio portion of Broadway musicals and broadcasted them on Voice of America. And one of their most popular services, up until just when they closed, every day on the English side of the Voice of America, they would have a program or programs in what they call special English. And what special English is, it's for people who are learning English. The topics are it's news, etc., but they keep the vocabulary very simple. In fact, they published a glossary of 1,800 words, and then they eventually put it online. Never depart from that glossary, except for a proper name, etc. Don't use contractions. I cannot come. They wouldn't say I can't come. And obviously, they're not going to use idioms like it's raining cats and dogs. And the other thing that they do to help people learn English, they make the delivery very, very slowly. Drive you nuts. Trying to learn a language? Pretty cool. Questions? Yes?
There was more than one transmitter.
The one in Westchester was the first and was the primary. Later on in the 60s, mid-60s, they built a similar facility in Delano, California, and it served the Pacific Rim. They also built one most recently, and that was the one that was still in operation, because they still do some shortwave, because there's some countries, and I bet you can understand which ones, that you're not going to get in there with internet or cell. North Korea, for instance. So they do some shortwave, and that's out of Greenville, North Carolina. But the way this would happen, so from Bethany Station, we would transmit. Now we might transmit to Felix's radio. You know, he could, or there were relay stations all over the world. So they would receive it and then retransmit it, maybe on a different frequency, to their area. There was a real creative one. Any Coast Guard people here? Any Navy people? If you're a Navy person, I can make sure you win a bet. A real innovative, and we have a display of it, innovative relay station was, they took a U.S. Coast Guard cutter and they put a transmitter, big transmitter in it, and a receiver, and they sailed to the coast of Greece, right off of Rhodes, parked it, and during the Cold War, they would receive signals from Bethany Station. Everybody know what a barrage balloon is from Second World War? The big balloons that they used to put up and then to look up. They connected an antenna to that, received the Bethany Station broadcast, and then rebroadcast it into the Soviet Union, because you're right below the Soviet Union. It was called the USS Courier. The reason I said you could win a bet is that it sets the record for the longest deployment of a U.S. ship leaving port and not coming back. Normally, even nuclear submarines, maybe a year at the most, how about 12 years? But we've had people who served on it. They're getting pretty old now, but they served on it. And they said it was great. Ship didn't go anywhere. All we had to do is keep it clean, and they all lived in Rhodes. And most of them got married there and have Greek families. So it's pretty cool. Any other questions? Yes, back there with the hat. Uh-huh.
That on occasion, you could pick up the radio station. Is that true?
Yes. The answer, like so many stories, whenever you have a large, a very significant thing like WLW and 500,000 watts, in fact, there's always stories, I've heard, I got it on my dentures, Now, the answer is very likely, if you were a farmer and you were within a mile of that transmitter and you put your ear up to a barbed wire fence, probably, yeah, the radio waves would do that. For those who lived near the Voice of America, okay, Cincinnati Bell had a whole crew of people that did nothing but troubleshoot people's, these are wired telephones, okay, because they'd pick up their telephone and be listening to somebody speaking Spanish because their system wasn't grounded well. If you were an audio aficionado, okay, and you remember turntables? There were two different types of cartridges in the turntable. And if you were really, really an aficionado, you had a magnetic cartridge, which gave you wonderful, wonderful fidelity, except when you're near Voice of America, when it played the programs. So the answer is yes. Whether or not, you could get it by putting your head against aluminum siding or on your dentures, that probably not. I'll tell you a funny story, though. Right across the street from the Voice of America is a church. I believe it's Nazarene. It was put in 70s. It's a nice church, big church. And I had a gentleman come over visiting the museum once, and he said, the first day we were open, noon came, and the preacher was still preaching, okay? And at noon, right across the street was the antenna for Argentina. At noon, there was a Spanish program that went to Argentina. So at noon, the organ, the PA system, every electronic device in that whole church started speaking Spanish. They were able to fix it out. But the guy was funny. He said, "Thank you." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because we knew after that the pastor could not talk after noon, and we were always the first in line at Bob Evans because all the other churches were still in." So anyway, another apocryphal story, and I want to tell you this, so you can learn about it. There was always the apocryphal story about WLWO. That was the shortwave station that I talked about. And the apocryphal story, we found out wasn't apocryphal, but we weren't able to prove it, was that station was used by the OSS, even before the war, to send messages to our spies around the world. And nobody was able to, they talked about it, how things like that, there were rumors, but how do you, well, 3 years ago, we got a lady on the East Coast got in contact with us. She was the granddaughter of a gentleman who worked at WLWO. Notice I used the word at. He didn't work for them. He was paid by the OSS to insert numbers, words, etc., in the broadcast for the spies. And we were able to prove that because through the Freedom of Information Act, she was able to pull his payroll files. And so some things are true. They're just hard to... Now, that was the 1930s, so I'm not giving up any military secrets here. Yes, ma'am. Did she work where?
The Voice of America.
Where?
Malaysia.
Malaysia, huh?
Yeah, and this, when you mentioned jazz. The American singers coming to Europe, particularly the jazz.
Uh-huh.
And there was a church program and lunch, so we said, let's have a rest, we'll go in and listen. And it turned out the chap that was speaking halfway through stopped and said, "Is that you guys?" Duncan he was an American. Duncan had actually interviewed him, Voice of America in Malaysia.
Interesting. Great story. Any other questions? Yes.
Just curious. Days of the week or hours of operation, or was it 24/7 all the time?
The facility operated essentially 24/7. Obviously, they would be closed for maintenance and stuff like that, but for all intents and purposes, 24/7. The programs were sent based upon what time it was there, and also based upon the ionosphere, because in order to assure, it's a really technical thing here. In order to assure this program is going to get to Berlin, you have to understand where the ionosphere is and where the bounce is going to be to get it there. So there's a lot of that going on. But the people at the other end would be just like in the olden days when we used to say, well, Jeopardy's on at 7 and, on 5 and MASH is on. You kind of understand when the program you want to watch is going or listen to is on, and you tune into that. So that's how they. So every week, for instance, you're in Poland, and every week at 8 o'clock there would be this program on this frequency from the Voice of America. So that's how they did it. Yes, sir.
More of a comment than anything else. I grew up in Los Angeles.
Yes.
And our elementary school teacher, I was in 6th grade, she would turn on the Voice of America. And for like half an hour, we'd all have to be quiet. And then at the end of the program, she'd ask us questions about what we learned.
Would she turn on the English version?
Yeah. But I never thought that, over 60 years later, I'd be in the
Yeah, if you're familiar, if people say what was the programming or the news like on the Voice of America, if you ever listened to the BBC, very 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 close. I'm not talking about the accent, but I mean the way they approach stories, etc. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I forgot to say that. He has been quoted several times. In fact, you can buy a T-shirt that says this: "Pay no attention to the Cincinnati liars." I do not have that in audio, but it has been reported, and several historians have said that. He called him. Actually, he didn't say pay no attention. He said that he referred to the Cincinnati liars on his broadcast. Yes, sir.
Did any of the work done by the Doran family here in Hamilton contribute to this?
Not that I know of. Yes, back there.
Do you know of any towards Voice of America?
Yes. And I would love to have a better story. I would just love to have a better story. Remember, the building has a tower. The tower has two purposes: security and gravity. Gravity, I'll go first. In the front of the building, there is a cistern that holds hundreds of thousands of gallons of rainwater. When we were in operation, that rainwater was pumped up into the tower, deionized, and plumbed through the transmitters, and that's how they cooled them. Okay. Gravity, security. At the top of that tower, before all the construction, etc., you can literally see every square inch of that property. Okay. And there was always someone up there. No, they didn't have a machine gun. They had a radio. But the guards, and they were not military, they were Pinkertons or something, they were armed, and it was a secure location. As far as we can tell, as much as I would like to say that, the Germans came down the Miami River in a submarine and came up and attacked the building, as much as I would love to tell that story, it didn't happen. Most of the time it was, "Hey, Joe, The kids are climbing on the fence over by transmitter number 1. Go shoo them off. But one of the towers was